A small biographical note for Mr. Amanatides. Kyriakos Amanatides is a graduate of Noble University, Bachelor of Arts with majors in Ancient Greek and Philosophy, and New England University, Bachelor of Letters, with a thesis on Modern Greek Literature. For 10 years, 1974 to 1984, Kyriakos taught Greek language and literature in the newly established Greek Studies program at Melbourne University and Greek as a second language at the Languages Centre of Monash University as part-time lecturer. From 1972 to 1989, Kyriakos was coordinator of the Greek language program at the Saturday School of Modern Languages, and from 1990 to 2000, he was coordinator of Greek studies at the St. Anargiri College, Oakley. Since the early 1990s, he is a freelance columnist with the newspaper Neos Kosmos. Kyriakos is the author of 4 books on the teaching of modern Greek as a second language and is currently working on the biography of the poet and entrepreneur Stathis Taraftopoulos. Kyriakos has been associated with several Greek organizations, some of which he served from the position of president or secretary. Let's set the scene for tonight's lecture with the opening scene of Antigone by Sophocles. It's a dialogue between the sisters Antigone and Ismene. The scene will be played by 2 girls, Eleni Giannopoulos and Parisa Ebrahim Rerakis. Let's put our hands together for the girls.
Now, dear Ismene, my own blood sister, do you have any sense of all the troubles Zeus keeps bringing on the 2 of us as long as we're alive? All that misery which stems from Oedipus? There's no suffering, no shame, no ruin, not one dishonour, which I have seen in all the troubles you and I go through. What's this they're saying now? Something our general has had proclaimed throughout the city. Do you know of it? Have you heard? Or have you just missed the news? Dishonours which better fit our enemies are now being piled upon the ones we love.
I've had no word at all, Antigone. Nothing good or bad about our family. Not since we 2 lost both our brothers, killed on the same day, double blow. And since the Argive army just last night has gone away, I don't know any more if I've been lucky or faced total ruin.
I know that. That's why I brought you here, outside the gates, so only you can hear.
What is it? The way you look at me seems you're thinking of some dark and gloomy news.
Look, what's Creon doing with our 2 brothers? He's honouring one with a full funeral and treating the other one disgracefully. Edelpis, they say, has had his burial according to our customary rites, to win him honour with the dead below. But as for Polynikis, who perished so miserably, he's to have no funeral. He has had his burial according to our customary rites, and that's what people say. But he's to have no funeral or lament, to be left unburied and unwept, a sweet treasure for the birds to look at, for them to feed onto their heart's content. That's what people say the noble Creon has announced to you and me, and now he's coming to proclaim the fact, to state it clearly to those who have not heard. For Creon, this matter is really serious. Anyone who acts against the order will be stoned to death before the city. Now you know, and you'll quickly demonstrate whether you are nobly born or else a girl unworthy of her splendid ancestors.
Oh, my poor sister. If that's what's happening, what can I say that would be of any help to ease the situation and resolve it?
Think whether you will work with me in this and act together.
In what kind of work? What do you mean?
Will you help these hands take up Polyniki's corpse and bury it?
What? You're going to bury Polynikis and it's being made a crime for all of Thebes?
Yes. I'll do my duty to my brother, and yours as well if you're not prepared to. I won't be caught betraying you.
You're too rash. Has Kyriakos not expressly banned the act?
Yes, but he's no right to keep me from what's mine.
Oh dear, think, Antigone. Consider how our father died, hated and disgraced, when those mistakes with which his own search revealed forced him to turn his hand against himself and stab out both his eyes. Then that woman, his mother and his wife, the double role, destroyed her own life in a twisted noose. Then there's our own two brothers, both butchered in a single day, that ill-fated pair with their own hands slaughtered one another and brought about their own common doom. Now the two of us are left here quite alone. Think how we'll die far worse than all the rest if we defy the law and move against it, move against the king's decree, against his royal power. We must remember that by birth we're women, and as such we shouldn't fight against men. Since those who rule are much more powerful, we must obey in this and in events which bring us even harsher agonies. So I shall ask the underground for pardon, since I'm being compelled. I'll obey those in control. That's what I'm forced to do. It makes no sense to try to do too much.
I wouldn't urge you to. No, not even if you were keen to act. Doing this with you would bring me no joy. So be what you want. I'll still bury him. It would be fine to die while doing that. I'll lie there with him, with a man I love, pure and innocent, for all my crime. My honours for the dead must last much longer than those up here. As for you, well, if you wish, you can show contempt for those laws the gods all hold in honour.
I'm not disrespecting them, but I can't act against the state. That's not in my nature.
Let that be your excuse. I'm going now to make a burial mound for my dear brother.
Oh, poor Antigone, I'm so afraid for you.
Do not fear for me. Set your own fate in order.
Make sure you don't reveal to anyone what you intend. Keep it closely hidden, and I'll do the same.
No, announce the fact. If you don't let everybody know, I'll despise your silence even more.
Your heart is hot to do cold deeds.
But I know I'll please the ones I'm duty-bound to please.
Yes, if you can. But you're after something which you're incapable of carrying out.
Well, when my strength is gone, then I'll give up.
A vain attempt should not be made at all.
I'll hate you if you're going to talk that way, and you'll rightly earn the loathing of the dead. So leave me and my foolishness alone. We'll get through this fearful dream. I won't suffer anything as bad as a disgraceful death.
All right then, go. That's what you think is right. But remember this. Even though your mission makes no sense, your friends do truly love you.
We thank the girls, as well as the last minute preparation. I think they did a great job. Mr. Kyriakos Amanatides.
Thank you, Priscilla, and thank you the two young girls, lovely and Lady Parisa, for the wonderful enactment of the first scene of the play Antigone. I'll be discussing later on. This was the opening scene in the play, and the two sisters, early at dawn, went before the palace for Antigone to ask her sister Ismene to assist her in burying her brother Polynices when he was killed in a duel with his brother Eteocles. Both were killed. But Polynices brought the army from Argos against his own city, Thebes, in a dispute with his brother as to who should be king after the death of their father. And in a duel, both were killed, and their uncle crown became king, and he issued an edict in order that Polynicus, who led the foreign army against his own city, should not be buried, whereas his brother Eteocles, who was defending the city, should be given buried with all the rituals for the occasion. And he issued an edict that whoever attempted to bury Polynicus would be punished, would be put to death. And he wanted to fight the edict and talk to her brother, to her sister, as to whether she would assist her in burying the corpse of Polynicus. Ismene declined to accept the sort of offer to do that, and she said, I can't go against the law of the city. And here we have, at the very beginning of the play, one of the very issues that we will be discussing later on, as to which law prevails. Is it the law of the city, or is it the law of tradition given by gods as to whether, so that every dead person should be given a burial following the right rituals. In the course of our discussion, we will see other issues, but at the very beginning, Sophocles puts the two young girls sort of introduce some of the issues that are to be dealt with further on. At this point, I would also like to thank my friend Kyriakos Amanatides, who did the technical work in putting my notes and some pictures in PowerPoint so that we can have this visual presentation too. In discussing Antigone, one of the plays of Sophocles, I thought I should make a very brief introduction of ancient Greek drama and the main tragedians, the main poets whose works have survived to our day, and we have a glimpse of what ancient Greek drama or tragedy was like. The ancient Greeks invented two kinds of plays: tragedy or drama, and comedy. Tragedy tragedy is the older of the two types. It is said to be the invention of Thespis in 434 BC, while comedy is generally dated some half a century later, around the 486 BC. Both genres were important to Athenians of the 5th and 4th centuries, and both were performed several times during the year in religious and agricultural festivals. Tragedy developed as an institution in Athens at the very time the Athenian democracy was emerging at the end of the 6th and the beginning of the 5th century BC. While plays began as religious dramas throughout the 5th and the 4th century, they took on themes of civic issues. Of the numerous ancient Greek tragic and comic playwrights, the works of only 4 have survived in their entirety. 3 of them are tragic playwrights: Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. Among the comic playwrights, only the works of Aristophanes have survived intact. It is a pity that so much has been lost of the literature of the ancient world, but at least we have the consolation of knowing that the works we do possess is the best there was. Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides, and Aristophanes were all acclaimed by their contemporaries as the most talented of the Greek playwrights, and together they won many prizes in other dramatic competitions. What follows, and we will see it on the screen, are the extant, the surviving tragedies of Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. From the days of those 3 playwrights lived, you will see that their lives overlapped to a great extent. Sophocles, Aeschylus, sorry, must go back. Aeschylus, born in 525 BC, died in 456. The plays that survive are Agamemnon, the Hoiphori, Eumenides, the Persians, Prometheus Bound, the 7 Against Thebes, the Suppliants. Sophocles, 496 to 406 BC, his plays Oedipus Tyrannus, Oedipus et Colonos, Antigone, Electra, Trachine, Ajax, Philoctetes. Euripides, these are the larger number of surviving tragedies, 484 to 404 or 406.
You went back.
Alcestis, Medea, Heraclide, Hippolytus, Andromache, Hecuba, the Suppliants, Electra, and there are some more. Heracles, the Trojan women, Iphigenia and Tauris, Ion, Helen, Phoenician women, Orestes, Bacchae, Iphigenia and Tauris. Now I will concentrate briefly on the work of Sophocles. The lifetime of Sophocles spanned most of the 5th century. As we saw, he was born at the beginning of the 5th century and died very close to the end of that century. Having witnessed the Persian Wars, he lived until the eve of the defeat of Athens by Sparta in the Peloponnesian War, which started in 431 and finished in 404 BC. It was known as the 30 Years' War. As a member of the aristocracy, Sophocles was acquainted with the major figures of Athens. Besides Pericles, he knew the historian Herodotus, who influenced his works. During his lifetime, he wrote, and make a mental note of that, he wrote 123 plays, of which only 7 have survived in their entirety. His first production was in 468 BC, and the last, for which there is a date, in 409. His final tragedy, Oedipus and Colonos, was produced posthumously by his grandson in 401. He won the first prize in the great Dionysia 18 times, and Antigone, that we will be discussing, was one of the plays that won the first prize. At some time in 441 BC, Sophocles produced his Antigone, and traditional records and its successes led to his election as general in the city of Athens. Sophocles was a prominent figure in the Athenian public life at a time when Pericles had entered his 15th year as the general of Athens. Antigone was probably the first of the 3 Theban plays. Theban are called the 3 plays: Oedipus Tyrannus, Oedipus and Colonos, and Antigone. They're called the Theban plays because the themes were taken, or the action was taking place at Thebes. I think I will show you a map of Greece in the 4th century BC, just to see where ancient Thebes was. Thebes is here. Delphi is somewhere there, very close. And at this time, as you will see, that was roughly in 371 BC, Thebes controlled that area of central Greece and some parts in the Peloponnese. So, as I said, Antigone was probably the first of the 3 Theban plays, 2 on Oedipus and 1 on Antigone that Sophocles wrote, although the events dramatized in it happened after the earlier 2. Antigone is one of the first heroines in literature, a woman who fights against a male power structure, exhibiting greater bravery than any of the men who scorned her. Antigone is not only a feminist play, but a radical one as well, making rebellion against authority appear splendid and noble. Some background to the tragic figure of Oedipus, because what we will be discussing about Antigone and Ismene and the rest are a consequence of the life and deeds of Oedipus. The story of Oedipus was well known to the audience which followed, witnessed the plays of Sophocles. Oedipus arrives at Thebes a stranger and finds the town under the curse of the Sphinx, who will not free the city unless the riddle is answered. Now we will have a look at the Sphinx. In Greek mythology, the Sphinx sat outside of Thebes and asked her this riddle of all travelers who pass by. If the traveler failed to solve the riddle, then the Sphinx killed him or her. And if the traveler answered the riddle correctly, then the Sphinx would destroy itself. The riddle was as following. What goes on 4 legs in the morning, on two at noon, and on 3 legs in the evening? Oedipus answered the riddle in the following way. A man who crawls on all 4 as a baby, walks on 2 legs as a man, and walks with a cane in old age. In frustration, because that was the right answer to the riddle, the Sphinx committed suicide by throwing herself from the rock. Since Laios, the king of Thebes at that time, had been murdered just recently, Oedipus became the king as the savior of the city and married the queen Jocasta. In time, he came to learn that he was actually a Theban. He didn't know he was from Thebes. He thought he was from Corinth. The son of the king Laios, cast out as a baby from Thebes because of a prophecy of the oracle of Delphi, that he was destined to kill his father and marry his mother. Realizing that the prophecy had been fulfilled, as we will see, Oedipus, horrified, blinded himself and left Thebes forever. The play's most powerful effects depend on the fact that the audience already know the sequence of events as I watch the play. Since the first performance of Oedipus Rex, the story has fascinated critics just as it fascinated Sophocles. Aristotle used this play and its plot as the supreme example of tragedy. Sigmund Freud based his theory of the Oedipus complex on this myth. The Oedipus complex that a boy wishes to kill his father and to sleep with his mother. That was the interpretation that Freud gave to this great myth of Oedipus. In reading or seeing a play of Sophocles, we inevitably find that there is an issue on which we are almost forced to take sides, or at least recognize the difference of of conflict of opinion. The conflicts with the key dramatizers are not merely classes of temperament or personality or interest. The characters seem to stand for principles or represent points of view to be typical of various human destinies. As we watch their sensational careers, we are not only moved by their individual fortunes, but driven to ask what general issues are at stake, and even at times to pass moral judgments. The human scenes which Sophocles presents are like life, in that they evoke thoughts of right and wrong, and sentiments of like and dislike. The dynamic movement of his plots and the vivacity of his characters are evident that the reader or a viewer of Sophocles' plays. Just as the art of Sophoclean drama reconciles opposing tendencies, the most important clue to its meaning may prove to be an appreciation of how Sophocles dramatizes antithetical or contrasting principles, forces, and values. The Sophoclean heroes define themselves by contrast, by opposing inimical forces, testing to the maximum their strength in this struggle. This suggests that we cannot fully understand a Sophoclean hero in himself or herself. His characters complement one another, but just as we see them as symbols of a whole mentality, a worldview, a moral code, so in their struggles we see the necessity for their behavior and temperament. They must act as they do. Their excesses are justified in the circumstances that they are displayed. Polemos partir pandum, conflict is the father of everything, according to the ancient Greek philosopher Kyriakos. Sophocles, along his other contemporaries, Heraclitus, Empedocles, Parmenides, and Anaxagoras, saw a class of opposites giving an intelligent, while dynamic pattern to all change and natural process. Sophocles was a dramatist rather than a philosopher or a lyric poet, because he found dialectical principles and forces alive, and alive only in action and passion, in human dilemmas, in nature, community, and history. Sophoclean heroes live on the edge of humanity. They constantly assert their individuality, nobility, freedom, strength, and often brutality. These are scenes from the burial of Polynices by Antigone. And that's Antigone in a play. The play Oedipus Tyrannus is concerned with the fall of the Theban king. The Oedipus Kolonos with the close of his life, and Antigone with a later episode in the fortune of his children. Eteocles, Polynices, Antigone is many. However, the order of the composition was Antigone first, Oedipus Tyrannus second, and Oedipus Kolonos the last. The drama Antigone belongs by time as by spirit to the very center of the age of Pericles in the middle of the 5th century BC. Antigone, as drawn by Sophocles, bears the genuine impress of this glorious period in the life of Athens. It is not without reason that classical scholars have recognized Antigone as the noblest, the most profoundly tender embodiment of woman's heroism, which ancient literature can show. At the same time, the play is distinctively a work of Greek literature at the highest level. Antigone and Ismene, the daughters of Oedipus, and this is what the two ladies enacted before, the two young ladies enacted before. Antigone and Ismene, the daughters of Oedipus, discuss the disaster that has just befallen them. Their brother Polynices and Theocles had killed one another in battle for control of Thebes. Creon, their uncle, now rules the city, and he has ordered that Polynices, who brought the foreign army against Thebes, not be allowed proper burial rites. Creon threatens to kill anyone who tries to bury Polynices and stations sentries over his body. Antigone, in spite of Creon's edict, and without the help of her sister Ismene, resolves to give their brother a proper burial. Soon, an empress sentry arrives at the palace to tell Creon that while the sentries slept, someone gave Polynices burial rites. Creon says that he thinks some of the dissidents of the city bribed the sentry to perform the rites, and she vows to execute the sentry if no other suspect is found. The sentry soon exonerates himself by catching Antigone in the act of attempting to rebury her brother. The sentry's having disinterred him. Antigone freely confesses her act to Creon and says that he himself defies the will of the gods by refusing Polynices' burial. Creon condemns both Antigone and Ismene to death. Haemon, Creon's son and Antigone's betrothed, enters the stage. Creon asks him his opinion on the issue. Haemon seems at first to side with his father, but gradually admits his opposition to Creon's stubbornness and petty vindictiveness. Creon curses him and threatens to slay Antigone before his very eyes. Haemon storms out. Creon decides to pardon Ismene, who was innocent, didn't take part in the burial, but vows to kill Antigone by walling her up alive in a tomb. The bride prophet Tiresias arrives, and Creon promises to take whatever advice he gives. Tiresias advises that Creon should allow Polynices to be buried, but Creon refuses. Tiresias predicts that the gods would bring down curses upon the city. The words of Tiresias strike fear into the heart of Creon, into the hearts of Creon and the people of Thebes. And Creon reluctantly goes to free Antigone from the tomb where she has been imprisoned. But his change of heart comes too late. A messenger enters and recounts the tragic events. Creon and his entourage first gave proper burial to Polynices, then heard what sounded like Haemon's voice wailing from Antigone's tomb. They went in and saw Antigone hanging from a noose, and Haemon raving. Creon's son then took a sword and thrust it at his father. Missing, he turned the sword against himself and died embracing Antigone's body. Creon's wife, Eurydice, hears the terrible news and rushes away into the palace. Creon enters, carrying Haemon's body and wailing against his own tyranny, which he knows has caused his son's death. The messenger tells Creon that he has another reason to grieve. Eurydice has stabbed herself, and as tells Creon that he has Eurydice has stabbed herself, and as she died, she called down curses on her husband for the misery his pride has caused. Creon kneels and prays that he too might die. His guard leads him back into the palace. The many instances of antithesis in Antigone reach no synthesis or resolution in the plot of the play. However, they cause the audience to reflect upon the ephemeral validity of human laws in the microcosm of the polis, in contrast to the immutable nature of the laws of the universal macrocosm. The antinomies between Creon and Antigone can be summarized as follows: divine versus human law. Divine versus human law, individual versus state, man versus woman, private versus public morality. The conflict between Creon and Antigone has its starting point in the problems of law and justice. The difference is most explicitly formulated in terms of Antigone's speech and defense, both plea of guilt and self-vindication, almost encomium. Against the limited and relative decrees of man, she sets the eternal laws of Zeus, the unwritten laws of the gods. She chooses the divine command over human compulsion. Antigone's unqualified declaration for absolute values thus precipitates a redefinition of some basic ethical categories. She's well aware she must pay the price for standing outside the conventional definition of law and justice. She challenges human law knowing full well that it will result in the loss of life. It is by this extreme defense of her beliefs and that she rises to a heroic and deeply tragic stature. In the face of Antigone's resistance, all of Creon's rationalism breaks down and is helpless. Creon understands nothing of the limits of human power and control, as well as lacking a true reverence for the gods, the powers beyond human life. He also lacks a deep awareness of the complexities within the human realm. Hence, he tends to see the world in terms of harshly opposed categories: right and wrong, reason and folly, youth and old age, male and female. He scornfully joins old age with foolishness in speaking to the chorus, which is composed of old men, and refuses to listen to his son's advice because he is young. He repeatedly sees the conflict between Antigone and himself in terms of the woman trying to conquer the man. Antigone's acceptance of her womanly obligation stands out the more by contrast with Ismene's rejection of it. We must remember, Ismene said, that by birth we're women, and as such, we shouldn't fight with men. Ismene feels her womanhood as something negative, as a weakness. In contrast, Antigone finds in it a source of strength. Ismene is moved not by principles, but by timidity. She dares not join Antigone in so great a risk. In fact, she feels her qualms and has some guilt about her refusal. She knows that the dead will not be pleased with her, as she says, "Therefore, I beg those below the earth, for pardon in that I am forced to do this, forced in this, and I shall obey authority. By pitting state and family against one another, Sophocles comments on the segregation between men and women in society and the devastating lack of equality that threatens harmony. What Antigone implies is that the lack of balance between the two breeds resentment in the subordinate sect and precipitates conflict. It is only when Antigone's rights are violated by Creon's decree that she is provoked to rebel. In this way, she becomes a figure of moral agency, standing up for the marginalized and questioning the moral justification of Creon's laws. This passionate defiance of state dominance over domestic values leads Antigone down the path of glorified destruction. She's proud, as is Creon, though her reasons are portrayed as being more noble than Creon's because of his obvious self-interest and stubbornness to carry out his brutal deed. A political or historical interpretation of the significance of the Antigone is, of course, inadequate, yet the historical side has some wider range of significance. The play, at one level, is almost as certainly a statement about nature and ideals of the Athenian democracy. It rejects the autocratic rule implied in Leo's outlook and behavior. What Antigone demands, on the other hand, is that the state take into itself the sanctity of blood relations, the value of affection and emotional ties, and the uniqueness of the individual. Creon's position as defined by his following words is totally rejected by the turn of events. He says, "Power is yours to use what Lord you will, both for the dead and for all of us who live." Creon is so presented by Sophocles that soon the audience would begin to see in him qualities of the typical traditional tyrant, such as the Athenians of the 5th century BC loathed. As the plot develops, Creon becomes more tyrannical, more convinced that he is right and that everyone else is wrong. He may be all for order, but the order which he demands is little less than servitude. In his arguments with his son, Creon speaks of the obedience he expects from others, and he says, "Whomever the city recognizes as ruler, we must obey in small things, right things, and their opposites. Only polis tisie, to the Criclini, tes mikra, celicia, cetalandia." It is obvious that Creon demands an absolute, unquestioning obedience and does not care if it is right or wrong. At one point he puts the following question: "Does not the master own the city? Utu krapuntos polis ine." Here Creon touches on a matter familiar to all Athenians, that the old claim of the tyrants, that was the old claim of the tyrants, which Athenian democracy denied in practice and in principle. The analysis of Creon's character and behavior shows that for the Greek audience, he was by no means an abstraction. He was a type familiar to them in life and in literature. Listen to what Creon has to say when talking about women. If she, he means Antigone, gets away with his behavior, then call me a woman and call her a man. Clearly then, he is saying he must not act in a feminine or weak way. He must be decisive and firm in a masculine sense. Then Right after that, Antigone says to him, when child, I would join anyone in loving, but not in hating. This is one of the most beautiful lines in the play. And yet, immediately after that, in the next line, Creon says, I'm not here to be served around by a woman. So the play Antigone cannot have owed its first success to any ephemeral or topical attractiveness in its subject. It deals with a theme that raises broad issues which still have much vitality, and it deals with